Raising children is difficult, and with so much information out there, it's hard to know what advice to trust. The Child Psych podcast brings you the top parenting and mental health experts in the world. This podcast is designed to encourage and educate you with the most up-to-date research and concrete strategies that foster healing and resiliency in children and teens, and tools that make parenting easier. Whether you're a professional or parent, you will walk away with answers that empower you, and you'll feel more confident knowing you are on the right path. Most importantly, we're here because we need to raise a generation of children who don't need to recover from their childhoods.
Everyone, and welcome to the Child Psych podcast. My name is Tammy and I'm a registered child psychologist, a registered play therapist, the co-founder of the Institute of Child Psychology, and I'm a mom to 3 amazing kids. Today we have with us Mena Suvari, and we're just so thrilled she's decided to join us on our podcast. And this is all going to be about her vulnerability and her wonderful work on her trauma journey of healing. So I'm just ecstatic she's willing to open up and talk about everything she's endured. And hopefully any trauma survivors who are listening to this podcast will feel very akin to some of the things she's been through and how she's been navigating that in terms of her parenting journey and her individual journey and growth as just a human being. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Okay, so most of you know who Mena is. She's an American actress, producer, fashion designer, and model. Her accolades she has received include a Screen Actors Guild Award along with a Primetime Emmy nomination. After beginning her career as a model and a guest starring on several television shows, Suvari made her film debut in 1997 with the drama Nowhere and rose to international prominence with her appearances as Angela in the critically acclaimed comedy drama American Beauty, for which she received a BAFTA nomination for Best Supporting Actress, and Heather 3 times in the American Pie films, which everyone in my family knows you for, along with American Beauty. She's been a model for Lancôme Cosmetics and print ads for Lancôme Paris Adaptîve, as well as a longtime supporter and activist for the Starlight Children's Foundation and African Medical and Research Foundation. She's married and has 1 child, and she is the author of the book, A Great Piece of Memoir, which I had the pleasure of reading this weekend. So we'll be talking about your journey personally and just what you've endured as a human being, which has brought you to this place.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to show everyone, for if anyone's watching, this is the book, and it's highlighted, especially the first 5 or 6 chapters, especially as a trauma therapist working with kids who have endured a lot of adversity. Your vulnerability and how you expressed through your poetry and your journal entries were very moving and very real.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, what people don't know is that sort of how this journey came about. And then when I started to write, I ended up, long story long, writing about 2 books worth. And I had to then fit it into a sort of memoir format. And I had to then work with a lot of, those moments in time, those memories, and kind of construct them to fit within that. So it was a little challenging to write within that sort of fit box and communicate all of that. But yeah, it really came out of me. I was moving at the time. I found my diary and I found a binder of short stories and poems that I entitled The Great Piece back when I was a teenager. And it was just a moment of me feeling like I want to approach this again, and I want to turn it into something. And so that's really how the book came about. I didn't plan on ever writing a book, and it really was a moment of me trying to heal by just telling my story. And after I finished writing it, I became pregnant. I found out I was pregnant, and I feel like there's so much, there's so much like mystery and power within that about just letting go of the things that, that don't serve us anymore. So it was a moment of me trying to move past a blockage of fear.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful reframe. And if you don't mind, we could talk a little bit about your beginnings. I think people see someone who's risen to stardom and who's been very successful in what they do, but those roads are paved with adversity and not the most pretty beginnings you would hope for a child who enters Hollywood, who enters her career. And this included, a sexual assault at 12 years of age, and we can go into that as much or as little as you want. It came with, as far as I can tell, a ton of objectification and victimization as a young, vulnerable teenager entering Hollywood with these managers and photographers. It's disgusting, honestly. I'm sorry to use that word, but it's disgusting. And then you spend your early 20s in these relationships where you're trying to heal yourself, but you found yourself being a victim all over again, and trying to move past that and to heal and to work towards, your individuation as a human being, which I think you did quite well. But it required a lot of stumbling, because as many of us who have been through a lot of adversity have to experience a lot of pain in that healing journey.
Yeah, I think that, for what I can say and sort of safely say, because it is a part of it, my great grandparents went through a lot. My grandmother went through a lot. She was one of 4 daughters that was first generation from Greece. And then that was my mother's mom. And so there was a lot of trauma, a lot of generational trauma. And so really, the older I've gotten, becoming a mom, all of these things, it's allowed me to see really the unfortunate inability that my mom had, which isn't her fault. It's just that, unfortunately, that's the place that I came from. And so that then really turned into, like you said, like me having to learn all these lessons on my own. And again, as a parent now, I can't even imagine that. It's impossible for me to think of. But I think a lot of that for me in my circumstance just really came out of people unaware and unable to approach me in the way that I needed. I was the youngest of 4. I was the girl in the family. And I also feel like I'm a very sensitive person. And I believe that there were just things I needed that it just couldn't, there wasn't the time and attention and care that I needed emotionally. That's I think the biggest thing. And so the lack of that then really led into, like you said, stumbling and having to, go through that process over and over again of why are these patterns repeating? It's unfortunate, because then that person, I felt very alone in that whole process. I've had to, learn it the hard way. I think that also kind of puts you in a state of always comparing, because you don't know, so it's a lot of things that I really still, it's not just wrapped up with the book, but it's a lot of those things that I still every day deal with, those things of feeling good enough, or having the ability to approach a situation or handle a situation, because I didn't have the figure to look to for that hopefully positive influence, so none of that was really there. And yeah, and I think that those are the lifelong effects that I think people don't, or now we're starting to really talk about. I mean, because, I was born in 79, as a child of the 80s, really, it was see you at the end of the day, it was that kind of thing.
You talk about in your book, especially in the beginning, being alone and unsupervised, and the adults being absent from anything you were engaged in. which left you feeling really alone and invisible and seeking love in maybe unhealthy ways because you didn't want to be alone anymore. You wanted to feel visible.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot
And
of things. I mean, I was reading earlier. So there were some issues with my schooling because it sort of turned into a situation where they didn't really know what to do with me. And so they would put me in the library with books, you know, because it was like, it was sort of that kind of thing. It was like trying to figure out where to put Mena. And I think that, again, if I were to make a safe assumption, because now I'm a parent, I just feel like maybe my family didn't have the ability and the tools and like the knowing to think of those things in order to steer me in a better direction. I know that my mom at times had talked about people wanting to put me in Mensa, you know, when I was younger. And for her, she felt like she didn't want me to quote unquote be a freak, which was interesting to kind of process as I got older, because it really made me feel more, I think I felt upset that my mother hadn't taken that opportunity, because as I got older and went through so much of those things on my own, it made me feel that if I had had that type of like-minded group or community, it would have prevented me from ending up in a lot of these situations that were really toxic, you know. But again, I don't think that my parents had that perspective, or others really fought for that. And so I think that what happens is then kids kind of get like, you just get lost in the mix in a way.
yeah, you had said in your book, I felt pressure to fit into a box that I couldn't squeeze into.
Well, that's true, because I mean, again, I was the youngest of four, the only girl. I'm an Aquarian. Like, I always just had this mind of unusual things and adventure, and you know, very inquisitive. I think, and that's what I mean about the kind of sensitive aspect to it. I think it just wasn't acknowledged in that sense. And so what's good about a lot of this is I think that indirectly then it can give us the opportunity to affect us to be better. And that those are the things that I'm always thinking of with my son. I'm always trying to be really sensitive to those in those areas that I didn't receive.
Absolutely. If you're okay, I want to touch a little bit, if it's okay, on the experience when you were 12, which I think is maybe the second starting point to what happened to you. The first was feeling alone in being different than everyone and not finding belonging and not feeling seen in your family sometimes.
Yeah.
But this incident happened where you were looking for love and acceptance in the wrong place because you were 12 and this 16-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Part of that, what's important is that we moved right before I started middle school. And so we moved from Rhode Island to South Carolina. So I was a Yankee. I was, you know, I was going into an all-girls school, which I'd never experienced, which a lot of people had already known each other from, you know, elementary and younger, right? So I was coming into a completely different environment. And I remember when we lived in downtown Charleston, we lived in this guest house, and there was a single mom that lived in the front with her daughter who was close to my age. And again, it's really taken me my whole life to think back on moments and like make connections and be like, oh, maybe that, because I was so conditioned to think that what I was experiencing was normal. But what I would see is I would see this mom with her daughter, and they had this relationship. And I remember it fascinated me, and I wanted it so badly, and I didn't understand it, but I thought it was so cool. And really at that time, it was just a lot of memories of feeling and being alone. I also started to have nightmares at that time of being in a house that I couldn't get out of. I started to have dreams or nightmares of something I couldn't get away from. Sometimes it had a paranormal aspect to it. Sometimes it had a aggressive, like, female and male figure, and I couldn't get out of. So I was experiencing these types of things. And my brother, who was there with us, the other two were older. And so our family was always sort of like separated. But he would have his friends, this guy, come over because they were high school friends. And the first moment I remember is him jumping on my bed and like picking on me and then playing really loud music. And again, if I were to look back, it's like there's never any memory of protection. There's never any memory of like discussing what those moments were. I just was sort of like, I think, there to experience it. And when we moved from that downtown location, we moved to a house, like a suburb in across the bridge. It was called West Ashley. And that boy lived next door. And so my thing during the days was I loved to rollerblade. Like that was kind of my thing. I would just rollerblade around the neighborhood. And, he would come over. And he started to write me letters and love letters and all of these things. And I think, it really made me feel special. I don't have any memories of anyone ever really like asking me how I was, like, how are you feeling? Anything about the emotional aspect of it. And so, I think I just fell prey to all of that. I didn't know what any of that was. My mom shared with me a memory around that time, and I believe it was after that moment, after the rape. She said she found me crying on the stairs of the house, and she asked me what was wrong, and I said nothing. And that's the thing right there. It's just, I was let go.
But there was never space to talk about your feelings.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. I remember having moments of like, I remember when I got my period, which was right before the rape. And that was the fall because the rape happened in January. That was in like December or something. And I remember not telling anyone. And I only went to my mom when it didn't stop. And I was so scared that I was dying. And so, yes, as I got older, I thought back on those things. Like there's a reason that I didn't let people in or welcome them or want them to help me. I'd kind of say like, I got it. And that's interesting to me because that sort of tells me like the damage was done. Like, when did I close that door?
And then when you needed help the most to process what had happened to you, you didn't know how to walk down that road of vulnerability to seek out that comfort and process.
Yeah. And I'd also had, like you said, moments of every time, like maybe being at the dinner table or something, like wanting to add something into the family. And then I was just never heard or seen. And then I remember a lot of moments of people finally saying, oh, what is it you want to say, Mena? And I'd say,
it's gone now.
So yeah, I think it's that it was that process of emotionally learning, like no one's gonna give me what I need, I guess.
If I have your permission to read a section from your book about your emotional reaction to what happened, because I just think it resonates with anyone who's a survivor of any assault or, okay. I turned onto my side facing away from him and cried so deeply, so full of shame and fear, so broken. I hadn't been ready. I was too young to even know, oh my God, I'm going to cry, to being what ready was. I hadn't wanted to do it. The most precious part of me was taken from me by this person against my will. He was present, but the rest of me was gone, fleeing the dark, looking for a safe place to hide, to cry, to recover, to eventually shut down the emotions and tell myself this was normal and I would be all right. I was never all right again because in that moment, I became what I believed I had allowed to happen to me.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things that we do as kids, right? We take responsibility and we think that it's like us. We think that we're the ones that caused it and, we're the ones that must have done something wrong. And yeah, we just internalize it.
And I think in that moment you you feel like an object. Like that is the only way we can receive love or connection and belonging is through objectification, and that's normal, which sets the scene for your adult romantic relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of that kind of happened for me being a girl. I started child modeling when I was like 7, and so I was born in Rhode Island. That took place in Boston, and that was before we got to Charleston. And when I got to Charleston, I picked up modeling again, and so I remember, I talk about that in the book too, like my first photo shoot, I was 12, and they put a leather jacket on me, and they all said, doesn't she look 18? She looks 18. So I was just living in this space of like, I want to be an adult. Like, I'm an adult, like you see me as 18 and that's what you want from me. I made that connection very early. Like, this is what I have to offer. And that will get attention. It's nothing else that I have to offer. It was, I think, very heavily communicated in a lot of ways that I had something on the exterior that was worthy. But again, nobody was really talking to me enough about how I felt or like what's going on during your day. And I think that, again, the people that I had around me, if I was in that state of sort of saying like, I'm fine, they didn't have the skills, the ability, or the tools to like see past that. They weren't.
It was armor.
Yeah. So they just took whatever I said at face value and didn't ever try to get in there any deeper.
Yeah. Well, throughout your journey into your rise into Hollywood, especially listening about your managers and some of these photographers, is this slow, steady decline into this objectification that happened, where you become this pretty thing that they can tear apart and decide what's not working, what is working. And you learn to just become a chameleon and become whoever they tell you want to become. But underneath it is this desperate, which it makes sense. All kids have this desperate desire to belong and be loved and to be seen. But the only way you were able to get that, from what I read and from, listening to your story, was through these toxic relationships with these professionals who are supposed to be looking out for you, but instead were objectifying you and wanting to sleep with you. And do you think that's a common thing in Hollywood? Because I can only imagine how that had a ripple effect into your romantic relationships into your 20s and 30s.
I think it's a common theme really anywhere. And I think what it implies is that there needs to be a sense of protection. I think what really, what I was trying to point out there, like with the photo shoot of this photographer, I mean, I was dropped off, was left there, and
left.
And I think that can, I mean, it's hard for me to comment on it because I don't know, I mean, if I don't know what the research went into of my mom finding this person, you know what I mean? But I believe that I talk about the first time, well, we were sort of making the move from East Coast to West Coast, but I was left with my first manager. Like I was like sleeping on his couch for a week, and I can't even imagine allowing my child to do that, because that was just something I feel I was way too young to experience. I think a lot about that as a parent now, about age appropriate things, and it always kind of blows my mind on I feel like there isn't enough sensitivity like in that area.
Yeah, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and even when she goes to a friend's house, I'm like, who is there? I want the parents' phone number. I want to meet them. I need to know where you're going. Who are these friends? I want them to come over first before you go to their house. Like, the thought of, when your parents, I know they're doing the best they could at the time, but they just multiple times they left you for a week in LA while they moved. Left you at a photographer's house unsupervised, where that didn't go well. I encourage people to read the book to learn more, but it's like you wrote in your book, I was more often than not left to my own devices. When I had free time was my parents' way, but there was plenty of room to wander. Why all these introductions to men, sex, rock and roll through the sick and twisted interactions? Where were my parents? Where were the adults? Any of them? And what was I looking for? Had I really chosen from somewhere inside of me that I would trade anything that I could for any form of emotional comfort?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about coming out to LA, living at the Oakwood apartments for the summer, which a lot of people did at the time. Now it's changed. It's been remodeled. But I would, that was sort of what I would do. I would just kind of roam around. I mean, this was also the 90s. So we didn't have social media. But I ended up, there was some guy that was like in his 20s. I talk about it in the book. And I ended up in his apartment. He's kissing me and touching me, and I'm just as horrified. But I think to myself, if I'm looking back at that, just like what you read, like, why was that okay for me? Like, somehow my behavior implied that what I was doing was normal for me and okay. And that's just mind blowing. But yeah, even in Burbank, when we finally moved here and I was going to high school, I would just walk around Burbank. Just like, I didn't have anything like, I think about my son now, he's 3.5. And it's like, we go to a little karate after school. He has like soccer and tennis. Like, we're always like, he's doing just enough. And we always like carefully ask him how much he wants to do. But it was like that involvement, like extracurricular stuff. Like I just sort of was like walking around and I ended up hanging out with the wrong people. I ended up in the wrong situations because I didn't have like a healthy structure around me. And I didn't have like what you're talking about, just when you're like, who's the parent, their phone number, and, them coming over. Even just that energy that you give up, that then makes the child feel like somebody cares about them. Like I didn't feel like anybody was interested either. And so I think it just slowly, like, it's like a thing that just slowly unravels, and by the time that I was a preteen and teen, it's like normal, there's nothing's on fire. There's no crazy emergency. So everything must be okay. And I didn't talk about my parents a lot in the book, and it's not wholeheartedly for me to talk about. There's only so much that I know. And I appreciate what you're saying about my mom. I do know that, she came from a lot of abuse as well. And so she was emotionally like a teenager. She was left to her own devices. And I believe, I feel that I'm different in that spirit, that I've been stronger to pursue more. I don't think my mom had the ability to do that. And so that's the result that you got out of that. It was that inability and unknowing, because at times my mom would say, she honestly didn't know what teenagers were doing. She didn't, I think, have really any knowing of that boy being around me and him thinking of me sexually, which is odd, but
I think parents have limited tools sometimes, and they do the best they can with the tools that they have. And all we can do is try. And I thought there's a lot of grace in how you spoke about your parents. But I wonder, after working with a lot of trauma survivors myself, there's often an element of approaching the parents and saying, you need to ask for forgiveness because you didn't protect your child. You didn't necessarily do the thing, but that child, regardless of how this happened, felt like they were alone, that you didn't protect them, and you didn't know what was going on. And you didn't take the chance to ask when you saw they were struggling and shutting down. And I'm wondering, in your situation, if you're comfortable saying, if you've had any of that closure from your family, that they have acknowledged this dynamic of being alone and maybe exposing you to things you shouldn't when you were very young.
Not really. I wrote the book, sort of surprisingly. It's not like I ever thought that I would. And it was promoted, but I didn't like announce it to my family. So I believe that they know about it. I don't know if they've read it, but I didn't write it for them. That's the thing. I wrote it because I just couldn't. I was living in this space of like that wasn't my past. That wasn't me. Like, I don't know those people. And I just couldn't do that anymore. I was like, I have to integrate, and I'm not going to help anyone if I just act like I'm fine and I act like the person everybody thinks I am, because I'm not. And I really want to give back and help others. So I did it for that sense. I didn't do it in hopes that it would change things. I mean, all of that was to be expected and experienced. But so I don't really know, but I do know that I have had moments of expressing myself in a way that I never did, and really saying a lot of things, calling it out. And I feel like the last time I did that, it was better, because I really was in this place of like, this is what happened, and it's okay. Like, it's okay if I'm coming out of this. Like, we just need to acknowledge it. Whereas in the past, I was much more violently emotional and angry over it, and really wanting a response. I think that now I've met enough people, I've had enough conversations that, and becoming a parent too, it's like you sort of emotionally or energetically pick those battles. So I don't know really those answers, but I've always tried to be present and open for anybody that, ever wants to talk about it. All I can do is be a better person and be a better parent to my child. Like, that's how I see it.
Absolutely. I asked you because when I was 25 and the abuse was recognized from my father, it was a big moment, a change in my healing trajectory when it was acknowledged, at least. So sometimes I always inquire if anyone has any closure that way with process from their family when they feel either unsupported or it was at the hands of their family. Regardless of which one it is, it still needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've had that with people that I know, which is weird, which has been really helpful. Like, people that have gotten to know me and been really close in my life and have really helped me. Like, this is what happened, and this is kind of where you're at. And, that's helped me. But I think whenever I've tried to, I mean, my father passed away, and he was always older. My mother, I think, I don't know. I mean, the times where I have tried to approach things, it becomes very defensive, and it's hard, because it's sort of like a role reversal, the relationship that I have.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, she didn't get what she needed when she was little too.
Yeah, so it's like, it's that kind of uncomfortable thing where she will regress. So it's hard for me to approach that, So
it makes a lot of sense. And she hasn't done maybe her own healing.
I mean, we all do it in different ways. I don't want to say no. I'd much rather say that I hope for more healing for my family.
More healing.
I hope for more, because I feel like the thing that really has been lacking, and what I enjoy the most, are those conversations, talking it out, acknowledging things and having conversations about it, instead of acting like it didn't happen
and sweeping it under the rug and being like, this is the past. But unfortunately, the past carries into our current functioning. We can't ignore it. It's part of our story, and it's ingrained in our reactions and how we process our emotions. It's there.
Yeah. And I think, again, a big thing, like, my parents, like, we were always provided for. We had amazing things.
Absolutely.
I have amazing memories of so many wonderful things I was given. The emotional aspect. It's just, it's the whole picture, that really needs to be addressed. And so a lot of people can kind of think like, well, you were given so much. You were like, I have so many things that, yes, I was given. And that's what's been really hard too, is allowing myself to get to that place of like, yeah, but I'm not fully okay.
Yeah. Well, that's comparative suffering. When we say other people have had it so much worse than us, so we shouldn't be allowed to feel our pain. The last kind of thing I wanted to address was, as a survivor of sexual assault, and I think neglect in a lot of ways when you were young, emotional neglect anyway, what do you want to say to parents who have been through this or something similar, and now they're trying to parent and navigate that those experiences? What do you have to say to those parents?
Such a great question. I mean, I feel like, first of all, you have been the ultimate resource for me. The Institute of Child Psychology has literally saved me in so many ways. You sending me your book has been critical. I also adore my therapist. I found EMDR.
I did 3 years of EMDR.
Yeah. And that really, really helped me. I think that is the most critical. It's finding your people. I found other moms that I feel like I can connect with in the way that I really need to, that don't make me feel bad about myself. And so it's really that support and that community and, you know, that internal mantra too. It's like, it's been that whole process of me every day. I still do it. Every day I still try to make connections within my mind, body, and soul to help understand where I've come from, my behavior, how I can be better. It's like that. I feel like that's so powerful in and of itself, because I feel like that's so much of like what my family didn't do. It's like, you never ask any questions, you know, you just, and I'm always trying to be like, can I be better? You know, what can I learn? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just like a mix of really all of that, and feeling, I mean, I've been very proactive on the types of relationships that I have, that I, you know, I have them because I really value them and need them, you know, to talk about the things that, that can help both of us and help us all heal. You know, I don't like to have anything really surface. I want everything to be really deep and healing.
Yeah. And what I think is the most valuable gift you and other survivors of trauma have to give the world is you've been through the fire. And if you've done your healing, you know the way through. And so when you come on my podcast, Tanya's podcast, and share your story and say, there is hope at the end of this, there is healing at the end of this, you can be a good parent, you don't have to keep repeating these cycles. That's inspiring for parents, for any survivors, that they can break that. They can take what has happened to them and make it into something beautiful.
Yeah, no, it is possible. I mean, I always tried to say, and I said it in the book, I worded it like, if I could shave off a summer of suffering for someone, then I wanted to be the person to do that, because that's true. I mean, I think I want to be the person that I never had for people, you know, because yeah, I experienced so much of that. Like, you know, and again, I think what I touch on in the book is like, because my exterior, you know, there was so much of like, well, everything looks okay. So if everything looks okay, it must be okay. Yeah.
Well, your son is very lucky that he gets this version of you that's been enlightened and healed. And for any survivors of sexual assault, abuse, I encourage you to read Mena's story. Thank you for being a source of inspiration. As an abuse survivor myself, it was very healing, especially the beginning parts of your book about being left to your own devices and searching for love in the wrong places. Like, I feel that so deeply at my core as a teen that had very similar experiences. And again, here I am, same as you. We figured out a way through, and now we're in our different ways trying to help people find ways to heal and to inspire hope and inspire change in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you. So everyone, again, put it up in case anyone's watching the video. This is The Great Peace, a memoir by Mena Suvari. Thank you so much, Mena, for taking time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
We would love to continue to walk with you on your parenting and professional journey. Whether you're looking to enroll in a single course, join our free summit, or sign up for either our professional or parenting membership, we have something for everyone. And if you haven't joined us yet, our Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and weekly newsletters are full of free resources and quick tips. Links can be found in the show notes. Together, let's raise a generation of children who don't need to recover from their childhood.